President Obama returns to the Gulf region, and he's sounding a cautious note about the ongoing cleanup efforts there. Energy analyst Elliott Gue is discussing the potential impact that a halt in offshore drilling will have on domestic natural gas supplies. And the deadline draws near for public comment on a mountaintop removal mine.
From the Energy News Center in Washington, D.C., this is the Energy Report with Susan McGinnis.
Good afternoon, I'm Tyler Suiters in for Susan McGinnis. Thanks for joining us for this Friday edition of the Energy Report. President Obama is back in the Gulf region today. Right after he touched down in Louisiana, he immediately met with Coast Guard Admiral Thad Allen, as well as the governors of Louisiana, Florida, and Alabama. The president says progress is being made in BP's fight to clean up this spill, but he said it was still, quote, way too early to be optimistic. The president also questioned the company's spending on TV ads to, again quoting, manage their image during this oil spill crisis. As for BP's latest attempt to capture the gushing oil, it is apparently working to some degree, but not as well as the company had hoped. Despite a cap on top of the leaking pipe, oil continues to pour out into the Gulf. The company says it's trying to close the vents on that cap to contain the flow, but it's still unclear exactly how long that might take. Some oil, at the very least, is being recovered on a vessel on the surface. One BP estimate puts that amount at about 42,000 gallons a day from a leak as big as 1 million gallons a day. Meanwhile, tar balls are now washing up on the shores of the Florida Panhandle. It's the fourth state to be directly affected by the spill, and the devastation to wildlife continues as well. Oil-coated pelicans are now struggling in the surf on a Louisiana island. BP Chief Executive Tony Hayward, seen here, says the cost of the cleanup will be severe and long-running, but Hayward believes his company has the economic firepower to handle it. Hayward told BP shareholders today he is committed to rebuilding his company's reputation, improving safety measures, and restoring the damaged Gulf Coast. And about those oil-covered pelicans, a federal panel of experts says BP should continue the use of chemical dispersants to break up the oil, despite the potential harm to wildlife. Panel member Ron Jadirma says the group decided the animals harmed by the chemicals underwater had a better chance of rebounding quickly than the birds and mammals on the shoreline. Officials have released nearly 1.8 million gallons of chemicals on and in the water since that blowout first occurred. And here in Washington, dozens of protesters gathered outside BP's local offices. The group wants to call attention to what it says is BP's failure to protect its workers and protect the environments in the wake of the Gulf disaster. Another point the protesters want to highlight here, the need for the U.S. to transition away from oil and turn to clean energy sources. Since almost every headline about the Gulf now refers to the oil spill, the amount of natural gas being released from that well hardly gets a mention. Elliott Gue of the Energy Strategist says since deepwater fields also yield natural gas, an extended halt to offshore Gulf drilling, including drilling in shallow waters, that will all mean that natural gas would feel the biggest impact as a result.
So there's a lot of gas that comes out of the deepwater Gulf, and you know, if there's a long-term moratorium on deepwater drilling, it's going to affect U.S. gas supply. Now, shallow water, that's an even bigger problem. Most shallow water Gulf drilling targets gas rather than oil. And a lot of the larger shallow water oil fields have already been sort of depleted or very mature. But there's a lot of gas there. And you know, a moratorium or an effective moratorium we discussed on gas drilling could have a major impact on you know, U.S. gas supply.
Turning to a different energy source now, more than 1,300 people have weighed in on EPA's proposed decision to revoke a permit for West Virginia's largest mountaintop removal mine. EPA wants to rescind a permit granted back in 2007 for Arch Coal's Spruce No. 1 mine. The agency says valley fills would bury 7 miles of streams, hurt water quality, and affect nearly 2,300 acres of forest there. Pro-industry forces are accusing the agency of an illegal power grab, while those in support of the move and the reversal say that action is long overdue, a commitment to science, the environment, and social justice. The deadline for public comment is today. EPA says it does not have a timeline for making a final decision. After nearly 40 years, EPA is now issuing standards that lower the acceptable levels of sulfur dioxide emissions and also shorten the intervals for monitoring that gas. Under the new rules, so-called SOx levels will be cut nearly in half from the current 140 parts per billion averaged over 24 hours to 75 parts per billion measured hourly. The The standards are designed to protect against short-term exposure to sulfur dioxide produced when industrial facilities burn coal. Current standards were set back in 1971, but a court ordered EPA to tighten those standards in 1996. EPA estimates the rule change will mean $13 to $33 billion in health cost savings annually, as well as preventing tens of thousands of premature deaths and asthma attacks every year. The new rules go into effect 60 days after publication in the Federal Register. And EPA's tailoring rule is now in that Federal Register, and so the lawsuits over the rule are now underway as well. Among those filing suit so far, businesses, Republican House members, and the Southeastern Legal Foundation. The tailoring rule, which was initiated by Administrator Lisa Jackson, would enforce carbon emission limits on only the largest emitters, like power plants. The legal complaints say that EPA must enforce those carbon limits on even small businesses, even though those behind the lawsuit are actually opposed to any CO2 emission limits. And finally today, a panel in Connecticut is now releasing a report on Clean Energy System's deadly natural gas explosion back in February. The group is recommending that state regulators consider stronger licensing and training rules for a common industrial pipe cleaning practice known as gas blow. Back in February, the explosion killed 6 workers at the plant, which was under construction at the time. The panel discovered that state law does not require special training or licensing or oversight to conduct a gas blow, nor does it require companies to notify regulators and nearby residents. If adopted, the recommendations would make Connecticut the very first state to add extra oversight to the gas blow procedure. That report will go to a second commission, which will then report to Connecticut lawmakers for possible action in the 2011 legislative session. And that is this edition of the Energy Report. A reminder, you can send your suggestions or comments to us here in the nation's capital anytime. And the address is right there at the bottom of your screen. It's contact@cleanskies.com. Also, you can follow us throughout your day on Twitter and Facebook. For all of us here in the Energy News Center, we're glad you're with us. I'm Tyler Suiters, and you're watching Clean Skies News.